Welcome everybody, I trust you're keeping well. Today I'm going to show you a Ruy Lopez miniature which demonstrates how you can stumble into a winning position even after your own faulty strategy. Anyhow, without any further ado, I shall show you the Ruy Lopez miniature. White opens e4, black replies e5, then played knight f3, and my opponent plays knight c6. I then played bishop b5, and for those of you who are beginners and are not aware of, and not au fait with the opening theory, bishop b5 constitutes the Ruy Lopez. It was named after a Spanish monk, I believe, and has been heavily analysed by super grandmasters and employed by world champions such as Bobby Fischer and Gary Kasparov. My opponent then replied knight ge7. Now apparently this is the Cozio defence, C-O-Z-I-O. As the game was proceeding, I did not know it was the Cozio defence, but that is what it is called. The idea behind knight ge7 is to support the knight on c6 and to avoid any damaging of the pawn structure should I choose to take on c6 with my bishop. I then castled. My opponent then played a6, giving the bishop a kick. I could take on c6 with the bishop, but that would then justify black's defensive positioning with the knight on e7. So I played bishop a4. My opponent then played b5, forcing my bishop back, and so it has to go back to b3. Now my opponent here plays knight g6, which appears to be the logical point of the Cozio defense. If the knight goes to e7, it can go to g6. It has the advantage of supporting the pawn on e5 should it be attacked, and it seems quite practical. Now here I played d4, and I'd love to say that I analysed everything to the nth degree, but unfortunately not, because in this position, my opponent then I played d4. My opponent then took on e takes d4, and here my mistake was playing knight d4, because my opponent could then have played knight d4, and I would have captured queen d4, and he then would have had the unsubtle but brutally effective pawn on c7 to c5, hitting my queen. My queen can go anywhere, and then he would have c4, locking in the bishop. On b3, I would be forced to take the pawn, advanced pawn on c4 with my bishop, and getting 2 pawns for the piece, but it would not be ideal, to say the least. So knight d4 is actually a mistake in the game. I should have played bishop d5, which would have avoided the bishop being locked in. But anyhow, my opponent misses it and plays bishop b7. Here I played rook e1, and my opponent can still take d4, and I can recapture again. I'll be forced to recapture with the queen, and he can still play c5. So there's a litany of mistakes. And my opponent plays bishop c5, and now I avoid the problems that I've described, and I play knight f5. Now, Gary Kasparov famously said that if a knight lands on f5 unhampered, then you have virtually won the game. So although I wouldn't say that I'd actually virtually won this game, the knight on f5 is extremely strong because it hits the vulnerable point of g7, and can also manoeuvre to h6 with tactics involved. My opponent castled kingside, protecting the g7 pawn. I then played knight c3, and my opponent played knight to e5. Again, his reasoning, perhaps, was to bring the knight ultimately to g4, or just basically to bring it into the centre. I then played knight d5, which is direct, and which, along with the knight on f5, is honing in on e7. Now after d6, I play the direct queen h5. It's not often one gets a chance to play the beginner's move queen takes to h5, but here it's is particularly effective, as it threatens to support a future bishop g5. And already black's position, from seemingly just playing okay opening moves and standard defensive moves, is beginning to get critical. My opponent plays c6, threatening the knight on d5. Before I move my knight on d5, I play bishop g5, which threatens the queen. Again, black can't interpose his pawn on f7 to f6 because the bishop on b3, which could have been exchanged for 2 pawns early in the game, had my opponent seen it, pins the pawn on f7. So after bishop g5, my opponent plays queen d7. Possibly queen e8 would have been better, and it might be a little bit tighter. But my opponent plays queen d7. Now here, there are plenty of opportunities. Suddenly, white's positions come alive. There are multiple possibilities. I could play the bishop to f6 with tactics, with pawn takes f6, then knight h6. Instead, the knight is attacked, so basically I move it to f6. I'm quite happy to sacrifice the knight for a pawn. Now the queen on d7 is susceptible to a fork, and of course knight f6 check initiates that fork. So my opponent plays g takes f6, and I recapture bishop takes f6, and unbelievably in this position I'm actually threatening knight h6, checkmate. Again, suddenly positions that appear quiet can come alive, and in this position my opponent, in a state of desperation, plays queen d8, trying to sacrifice his queen for the bishop to avoid checkmate, although it would have been very difficult for him to do so. Bishop takes f6 after bishop d8 because of queen h6, threatening checkmate on g7. Before playing queen d8, there was the one option he could have played knight on e5 to g4. Then I would have simply taken the knight on g4 with my queen, and of course I'm threatening knight h6 checkmate even then. And after queen d8, my opponent resigned, because as before, allowing me to actually play knight to h6, which is checkmate. It's a miniature, and it's instructive in that you can end up in winning positions and attacking positions by just 1 or 2 prep moves, but without your strategy being cogently thought out. But as long as you attack black's weak points and try to initiate forks, it is white can develop a very strong game. As you've probably gathered, we're a new channel, so to help us out, please subscribe and press the notification bell. And please note, your comments are always helpful.